Hi, Misha here, and I probably should be sleeping or doing something productive, but I've been enjoying kind of doing a full overview of the various ships from different races. Now that we're at the end of the Eagle Moss collection of official starships from Star Trek, so I thought we would revisit the Klingons. Why not? Just hang out. So I've laid out 14, well actually 13 plus one that's sort of Klingon. And just thought we'd just chit chat. Nothing too formal. Kind of talk about the organization of the Imperial Defense Force. So, kind of looking at the beginning, let's start with the kind of non-military or non-combat ships. One of the most recent ones we received in the collection, this might be better, hopefully, maybe, I don't know, it's all theoretical to me, is the so-called Rebel transport. This is from Enterprise, or some Klingon rebel colonists commandeer the ship. It's not very big, 55-60 meters, carries 55 or so people, pretty thick, very steamboatish, even with things in the back that kind of look like smokestacks. It is very clearly an old ship, even in the 2150s, so has no combat ability. But it has your pretty distinctive for the Enterprise era style of Klingon warp nacelles. And I think it looks pretty neat. It has very clearly kind of docking ports on it. Pretty heavy model too. And yeah, we just don't see many civilian ships from any of the races in Star Trek. And then that's the nice thing about Enterprise. They were able to give us more ships because of the more affordable CGI of the day versus practical models. This is the Klingon military transport, also known as Goroth ship. This is the one that captured Archer when he had that Klingon bounty out for him. Ultimately, he would go to Rorapinthe, although it took a few times. Interestingly, this model was originally designed to be a Klingon shuttle for the pilot episode of Enterprise, Broken Bow. So, when they made it into more of a transport, they did scale it up. It's still not very big. I think it's about 88 meters. And I think it does fit the role of military transport well. It has a somewhat aggressive look, but not too much so. We know that it does have tractor beam, disruptors, perhaps a small shuttle bay or pods. We know it has life pods. As far as a model, physically it's very big. Actually very heavy too. Plastic, but the rest is pretty metal. I also like that it sits on its stand very well. By the way, this is really nice having two hands Really makes things a lot easier. Hopefully I have the camera sort of pointed in the right direction. This, I don't know. Slots in there. I think they did a really good job with that ship. Moving on. This is one of the first Klingon ships we do see in Enterprise. The Raptor. And I really like this model and design. I think it's very fittingly Klingon. We know from Enterprise that it has a relatively small crew, around a dozen. It's about 145 meters. Has photon torpedoes, disruptors. This is kind of, it's not a bird of prey, but it's kind of a long-range scout patrol craft. It's a very durable, rugged hull. By the time of Enterprise, it's not cutting-edge tech, but it's not super outdated, especially for Klingons who love using designs for a long time. It seems to have first been fielded around 2130. So that by the time of Enterprise, it's about 20 years old. But that's practically brand new for a Klingon hull. Oddly, it's said to not have escape pods. Something that is very quickly contradicted in Enterprise and later Star Trek. We could just say that T'Pol was wrong. But I like the design. They're on board the ship in the episode, but we don't see much of it externally. This kind of tubing, piping would be emblematic of Klingon ships from this era. Although the nacelles seem a little more modern than what we would come to expect from later Enterprise. But to be fair, this was the first Klingon ship we really saw on screen, so they were still establishing their feel at that time. Anyway, I think it's a cool design. It looks old, while not looking goofy or clunky. Their rigging there. And Eagle Moss did a really nice job with this model. This is one of the first ones I really wanted when it came out. It's almost all metal, including the wings, the head. Only the detail, the nacelles, is polymer, as you would expect. But yeah, it's not a bird of prey, but it's kind of in that family, perhaps. A predecessor of it. Here is the real Enterprise era bird of prey. This would have not had a cloak. This was well before the Klingons had cloaking tech, and thankfully Enterprise did not change that. They gave the Romulans cloak, unfortunately, but at least they didn't give it to the Klingons, right? Since it doesn't have cloak, it is a gunboat, a gunship. It is much smaller than a battlecruiser would be. Like the Raptor, it's about 145 meters. Probably has a slightly larger crew. It seems to be a little slower. The Raptors maybe around warp 6. This is probably max of warp 5, like Enterprise. It's used as more of a destroyer. It has photon torpedoes. It has one heavy disruptor on this wing. This disruptor, it's not a modeling error, is meant to be smaller. It has 5 standard disruptors. And then it has 2 light disruptors on the underside and a turret. So a total of 8 disruptors. 1 heavy, 2 light, 5 standard, plus photon torpedoes. No cloak. Presumably it can land, and it has 2 wing positions, kind of straight out and down. It is definitely more bulky than the later Bird of Prey. I really like it. The model, because of how much detailing it has, is pretty light, I'm not gonna lie. It does have a metal core. Big old head on this thing. But it is a pretty lightweight model. But since it's based on a CGI, that's kind of to be expected. And this would have been not a new ship in the 2150s either. Maybe older than even the Raptor, hard to say. But when Duras gets it, it's considered a demotion. So it is definitely considered a smaller class ship. And it was outgunned by a few different human ships. Next up, we have the one that I've talked about multiple times. The D4. This was in Eaglemoss's special or bonus edition, because it's not a in-universe ship, although it should have been. This should have been in episode, was it 5, 6, whatever, Unexpected of Enterprise, and was developed exclusively for that. But at the last minute, the producers made a really silly decision to use a Katinga model. But if they ever do a remastered of Enterprise, I hope they put this in or something like it, because the Katinga does not fit at all. And this does. It's basically meant to be like a TOS D7 direct ancestor. It just has the Enterprise style warp nacelles and the rigging or tubing, if you want to call it that. Slightly more bulbous head. Unfortunately, we don't have any tech specs for it. I know it's appeared in some calendars, and I think it might even be on Star Trek Online now. But it's beautifully fits in. It's kind of a early large-scale cruiser. And very Klingon, not overly gadgety or whatnot. And I'm really glad Eaglemoss made this one, because it really adds to the Enterprise era here. And they did a good job. They really did. To go with the D4, we have the D5. And this is another one that appeared pretty frequently from season 2 onward at Enterprise. This was their major cruiser. After the misstep of using a Katinga, they did wisen up and make their own ship. It's interesting because it has kind of several elements. It's very flat for a Klingon ship. typical nacelles. Very big head, but it's more angular than you usually see with Klingon ships. It works, it's just a little unique. It too has two large disruptors on the underside. Heavy disruptors. And of course it has standard disruptors, photons, shields, max warp of 6. Overall length is about 200 meters. And a standard crew when it's a combat cruiser of at least 100. This model was also used in a modified form as a deuterium tanker. They didn't have the large disruptors on the other side. Rather, they gave it deuterium tanks. The model's interesting because the front and the centerpiece is the metal. The wings are plastic, meaning that the weight is very much forward on this. Typically, it's the reverse. Typically, your rear has your weight and your front might be lighter, but not on this one. We received this model about midway through the collection. I was kind of hoping they would do the deuterium version. Why not? But, oh well. And the final Enterprise era ship here is a bit of an odd one. The so-called Augments ship. There's even debate if this really was a Klingon ship, but seems to be. Maybe. And this seems to be kind of a forerunner of the smaller bird of prey, because it's about 70-75 meters and can be operated with a crew of just maybe 6 or 8, carrying more as a attack ship, what have you. It's interesting they made this model at all in the show because they were at the end of series or season 4 and the show wasn't being renewed, and there really was no call for it because it was only on screen briefly, there we go, briefly, but they did. It's always nice when you see the extra effort. It really seems like the VFX team at Enterprise really gave it their all. And it's a cool little design. Nothing trend-setting, but it does look like kind of a Klingon assault ship or small torpedo boat. It looks mean and aggressive, fast. And like I said, it kind of paves the way for the later birds of prey. So we kind of see the different classes and types. You've got your main full battle cruisers, then you have your scout patrol ships, and you have your little attack ships in the Enterprise era. And it shouldn't be a surprise that fully half of what's on the tables from Enterprise, because they featured the Klingons a lot and they were able to make ships easier in that time period versus getting into practical models. And thus, moving into the original series and movies, we don't have near as much to represent the Klingons. This is the only one from the original series. Of course, the very famous D7 that we've had many models of from many makers in the past, but Eaglemoss just had to do this. I mean, there's just no way it'd be an incomplete collection if they didn't, and they did a good job. I mean, there's not much detailing on the original, but the head is polymer, the main body is metal, and the nacelles are polymer. I was kind of hoping they would do a special or bonus edition in Romulan paint. What do you think? Like a D7R with the big bird? It's all theoretical to me, but I thought it'd be neat. And again, I'm always happy for any Romulan ships. In the universe, this is basically a match, or at least close to a match for a Constitution. It's about 225 to 230 meters, a crew of 400 to 450. It doesn't, it's what you'd expect from a Klingon warship, but it does seem to have the ability to be a scout and to be a science ship, at least as much as Klingons ever science. So it's about as much of a multi-role ship as they can come up with, and it seems to have been mass-produced. And it seems to be cutting edge as of the 2260s, and was in frontline service through that century. And the Klingons, being the Klingons, I'm sure some served in second line units into the 24th century. Not much to say about it. We never see on board in TOS. We do see a CGI of this in the Deep Space Nine episode where they go back in time with the Tribbles. So that's kind of neat. Again, because it is from the 60s, the original miniature was pretty plain, but I think Eaglemoss did as well as they could with it. Next up, and as I've said, this was actually my first Eaglemoss ship I got myself, the Katinga. Really, this is just a refit version of the D7, but in universe, it's actually a little smaller, but 215, 220 meters, but more powerful, more capable. When we first see it in the motion picture, it doesn't have a cloak, but when we see it later on, it does. So it seems like they were refit with cloaks in the late 23rd century. By the time of Next Generation DS9, we see some with them, and these are still in service. They're considered old, but still deadly, and we see them even refit with more powerful disruptors. So they're very much analogous to an old battleship that keeps getting refit and updated with newer technology, more powerful guns. They're just built to be durable and they'll last. A lot of detail on this model. It's actually a little bit lighter than the D7. Because of all the detailing, it has more polymer. It still has metal, but I have done a video on the large edition of this that I think they did a really good job on. But it's just to me, probably the coolest of the Klingon ships. To me personally. And then finally, on this row here, I have the bird of prey with its wings down in attack mode. Oddly, Eaglemoss released this twice in the standard collection, wings out and wings down, plus doing even another one in the bonus collection with wings fully up for landing. This is another one they had to do. I get it. You have to do your birds of prey. I have it here to represent the first bird of prey we see, the Beryl from Star Trek 3. That is a small ship, 75, 80 meters, crew of 12. Very much like the attack ship from Enterprise. Kind of where they were scaling back. Small little boat. Because it has a cloak now, they've drastically decreased the number of disruptors to 2, although they are heavy, plus photon launcher. So instead of relying on its guns, it relies more on its surprise and stealth through cloak, which makes perfect sense. We see another bird of prey in Star Trek 5 and another bird of prey in Star Trek 6, both seeming to be of this smaller class size, which honestly begins a trend of way overusing this model. Or maybe that's just me. That said, it is very metal. The whole body here and wings are metal. Only part of the head and the guns are plastic. And this one does sit on its stand pretty well. Kind of slots in there pretty tight. And there we've kind of run through briefly the 22nd and 23rd century Klingon ships. And moving into the 24th century, TNG, DS9, and even Voyager, for what that's worth, era. The other bird of prey. This was early on, I think it was what, issue 3. Again, one they had to do. No question of it. In the collection. And of course this one's with the wings in the middle position, horizontal. Not something we saw in the movies, but very much next generation DS9 look. And for this, we'll call this the KWart class, because in next generation era, they kind of quit using the bird of prey as a small scout destroyer and more of a light cruiser. And it definitely had a larger crew of maybe around 36 at least, and appeared larger on screen, roughly 150 meters. So really kind of a return to the 22nd century bird of prey style. Of course, it was the same studio model, so it still had 2 heavy disruptors, cloaking device, 3 position wings, photons. And this is really, it's a neat design, but oh lordy, did they use it and use it and use it over and over. On the other hand, it gave Next Generation a movie quality model on a television budget, so you really can't blame them. And this was heavily used during the Dominion War. As far as the Eagle Moss here, again the wings are metal, Main body's metal. With the wings out like this, it's actually quite large. And slips out of my hands when I'm tired. And fortunately the stand isn't great, and because it's so splayed out, it is very easy to knock off, unfortunately. But what are you gonna do? You gotta have a bird of prey. So yeah, since we have two in the collection, I kind of think of one as more of the Burrell and one as more of the KWart. And this here is probably a favorite, both in the Eagle Moss collection because of the job they did, and just in general, the Vocha class. This was the first new Klingon ship we got in Next Generation. It appeared in Season 3, I believe. It might have been 4 for the first time. So it was pretty new in the 2360s and was first seen as the Chancellor's ship. It's quite a bit larger. It's about 480 meters. Has disruptors, photon torpedoes. It's classified as a attack cruiser. It is very much a successor to the D7, Katinga, all of that. And these were used in pretty large waves during the Dominion War. Yet, strangely, it does seem to kind of be overlooked. Even after they had this model. One thing I found odd was Martok's ship was a bird of prey, but he was a general. He really should have had a full cruiser. I don't know. And it's a neat design, too. The only thing is, in Next Generation, because of that show and everything being a miniature, we don't see these in combat a whole lot. A little bit in the Klingon Civil War arc, but kind of feel like it didn't get as much love as it could have, should have. Maybe that's just me. This one over here, to skip one for a second, I have out sort of as a joke, sort of serious. In our collection, this is the Vermilion Battlecruiser, the ancient ship from Deep Space and from Next Generation. Booby trap. But we do see this docking at Deep Space Nine, and we see it doing so when Kern's adopted family comes to get him after his memory is wiped. And since it does look very Klingonish, some say it's a Klingon transport or house ship. And since Star Trek definitely reused physical models, I don't know. Unknown Klingon ship. I like it, even though it actually started off not even as a Star Trek ship, from a whole different series. It fits in very well, looking sort of Klingonish. And since again we see it in Deep Space Nine, it's obviously not a Vermilion ship there. Has to be something. And since we have so few Klingon ships from this era, compared to, say, Federation, I wouldn't mind stretching a point and calling it some flavor of Klingon. The Klingons are also seen to use the trusty old merchantmen as a transport too. And finally, the Nigvar. A version of this was first seen in All Good Things, the final episode of TNG, but it's probably more famous when it appears in Deep Space Nine, the opening of Season 4, Way of the Warrior, when it's Chancellor Gowron's flagship. If the KWart is a light cruiser, and the Vorcha is a attack cruiser, or medium cruiser, this is decidedly a heavy cruiser, or honestly, more aptly known just as a battleship. It, actually the model is a modified Vorcha, you can see in the base here. But it has this so-called Cobra's head, has a heavy disruptor in the bow there. It has 2 more disruptor heavy cannons on the underside here, or maybe they're warp pods. I've seen it called both. Take it as you will. It's very interesting warp nacelle arrangement. This is quite large, larger than a galaxy at about 680 meters, so about as long as a Sovereign, but more massive. Has a large crew of around 1,800. And it's basically a command ship. They're said to be expensive and pretty complex to mass produce, so probably not something the Empire is making in large numbers. They seem to be used by the Chancellor, other politicians, and maybe the heads of influential houses. More of a status symbol thing. Again, much like a battleship. Think of it as the Yamato of the Klingon fleet. Big and impressive, with lots of guns, but maybe a little too much of a target and everything else. And this is probably one of the more meh models from Eagle Moss. It's heavy, I'll give it that. It's a lot of metal. And from the top it looks good. But the problem is it does something kind of odd for Eagle Moss. It has hollow sections, which you just don't see in most of their models. Like here. Under this thing here. Sorry. It's just hollow, there's no bottom. And the same for the bottom of these nacelles. It's odd because it's something they would very rarely do. Luckily it is in the back. I just kind of wish they would correct that, because it really detracts. Kind of wish they would do a special edition or an XL edition of this, because it's meant to be a big impressive ship. It's kind of the same thing I say about the Dominion battleship. I'm glad they did it, but I don't know, it seems a little odd in the standard scale. So yeah, it's probably one of the less successful, but it's still not complete crap. And the Vorcha is definitely one of the most successful. So there you have kind of a little rundown with the new camera on this. I don't know, I thought it might be fun. What do you think? Which one's your favorite? As always, if you could, like, share, and subscribe, and please feel free to comment below. I'm gonna hit the hay. So, with that, this is Misha. Catch you very soon next time.